I thought I was just paying for a stranger's bus ticket, but a single act of kindness turned me into the primary target for an organized scheme and a deadly internal investigation. Within minutes, my life transformed from a series of unpaid bills into a high-stakes hunt where the only way to survive was to hold on to a secret that could destroy us both. The rain in the city doesn't wash anything away. It only smears the grime into a more permanent aesthetic. I was standing under the leaky awning of a bus stop, checking my watch for the third time in a minute. I had a deadline, a mounting stack of bills, and a headache that felt like a slow-moving freight train behind my eyes. Then she arrived. She didn't walk so much as drift, a hunched silhouette wrapped in a moth-eaten wool coat that smelled of wet pavement and antique shops. She looked like she had been carved out of the city's shadows. When the bus finally wheezed to a halt, the driver, a man whose patience had expired sometime in the mid-90s, didn't even look up as the woman fumbled with her purse. She pulled out a handful of tangled thread, a few buttons, and a single battered transit card that clearly hadn't seen a top-up in a decade. "Insufficient funds," the driver barked, his voice grating against the rhythmic hum of the rain. "Step aside, lady. You're holding up the line." I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the crushing weight of my own bad luck that made me feel a sudden, irrational kinship with the chaos of her life. I stepped forward, slapped my card against the reader, and muttered, "I've got it." The driver didn't thank me. People rarely do in this city, and the woman froze. Her skin, where it met mine as I moved to push her past the turnstile, felt unnaturally cold, like smooth river stone left out in a winter gale. She didn't move toward a seat. Instead, she turned, her eyes milky and clouded, yet somehow piercingly sharp. Her fingers gripped my wrist, her grip tightening with a strength that defied her frail appearance. Her skin felt dry, like parchment, and as she leaned in, the world around us seemed to stutter. The ambient noise of the bus, the hiss of the doors, the rattling windows, the idle chatter of commuters, abruptly vanished, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence. She leaned into my ear, her breath smelling faintly of ozone and dried lavender. "You think you're paying for a ticket, child," she whispered, her voice rasping like dead leaves on concrete. "But you've just purchased a seat in a game you don't even know is being played. Check your pockets when the lights flicker, and whatever you find, do not let the service see it." I pulled back, shaken, intending to snap at her for being cryptic or insane, but she was already turning away, melting into the back rows of the bus as if she were a vapor. I brushed her off, telling myself it was just a senile rambler, a freak encounter in a city full of them. I shoved my hands into my raincoat pockets, trying to force my heart rate back to a normal cadence. That's when my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. I frowned, pulling my hand out. It wasn't my phone or my keys. It was a heavy, blackened metal key with a strange, serrated edge, and attached to it was a small, high-density drive. As the bus hit a massive pothole, the overhead lights didn't just flicker, they died completely, plunging the carriage into a suffocating, pitch-black abyss. In that darkness, I heard the metallic click of a holster being unsnapped just a few rows behind me, and a man's voice, cold and precise, cut through the silence. "Check everyone's hands. If they aren't holding a ticket, they're holding our leverage. Find it." The air in the bus turned thick, heavy with the metallic tang of static and the sudden, sharp scent of ozone. I pressed my back against the vibrating cold metal of the bus wall, the key and the drive clutched so tightly in my palm that the serrated edges began to bite into my skin. My heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Find it," the man had said, and the way he said it suggested he wasn't interested in collecting lost property. He was interested in cleaning up a loose end. I heard the sound of heavy boots moving down the aisle, rhythmic and deliberate. Every time a seat creaked under the weight of one of these individuals, the floor groaned in sympathy. They were moving with a surgical efficiency that had nothing to do with standard transit patrol. These were men who lived in the fringes, part of an organized scheme that didn't like witnesses and certainly didn't like outsiders holding their sensitive data. I needed to move, but the darkness was absolute. I risked a glance toward the front of the bus. A faint greenish glow began to leak from the driver's cabin, a handheld scanner. I realized then that they weren't just looking for physical items. They were sweeping the carriage for any electronic signal, any trace of the encrypted device I was holding. If the drive pulsed, I was dead. I slid along the floor, my breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't risk standing. My silhouette would be a target. I pushed the key and the drive into the lining of my coat, frantically trying to tear the fabric near the hem so I could shove them deep inside the padding. As I worked, my fingers brushed against a small, rough patch inside the lining. A hidden pocket I hadn't known was there. As I slid the objects into the secret compartment, the light from the scanner swept over the seat right above my head. I froze, paralyzed. A pair of heavy, mud-caked boots stopped inches from my face. The man's leg pressed against the seat, pinning me in the gap between the frame and the floor. He leaned over, his shadow looming large in the dim emergency light of the scanner. "Nothing on the passengers here," he muttered into a comms device near his collar. "But the woman who boarded at the stop, she's gone, and the guy who paid for her ticket, he's vanished into thin air." I held my breath until my lungs burned. The man shifted, and for a split second I saw his profile. He had a jagged scar running from his ear to his chin, a mark of someone who had spent too much time on the wrong side of the law. He wasn't a cop, and he wasn't a guard. He was a collector. "Check the ventilation shafts," the leader barked from the back of the bus. "She wouldn't have left without handing off the asset. If he's still on this bus, he's hiding in the guts of the machine." Panic surged through me, cold and blinding. I knew the bus layout. There was an access panel under the seats, leading to the engine compartment and the external maintenance ducts. If they were checking the shafts, they were going to start systematically tearing the interior apart. I had to get out, but the doors were locked and the windows were reinforced. Just as I prepared to crawl toward the maintenance panel, a hand reached down and grabbed my shoulder, hauling me up with effortless, brutal force. I collided with the aisle, and the man with the scar stared down at me, his eyes devoid of any human empathy. He didn't say a word. He just reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of illegal equipment, a short, jagged blade that glinted wickedly in the dim light. "You look like a guy who's had a really unlucky day," he whispered, his grip tightening on my coat. "But it's about to get much worse. We've been looking for that drive for months. You have 3 seconds to tell me where it is before the service arrives, and believe me, they're much less patient than I am." He pressed the blade against my throat, and just as I started to choke out a plea, a deafening blast shattered the rear windshield. The bus lurched, swerving violently into the side of a concrete barrier, and the interior light exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. In the chaos, the man's grip slipped, and I felt something drop from his pocket. A heavy encrypted key fob that looked identical to the one I had just hidden. The door panel swung open from the impact, and through the haze of smoke and rain, I saw a black sedan waiting on the shoulder with its lights off. A figure stood by the open door, watching me with a look of terrifying familiarity. It was the old woman, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes no longer clouded, but burning with a cold blue light. She wasn't a victim. She was the one pulling the strings. The screech of metal against concrete was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a serrated scream that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the night. As the bus jolted to a shuddering halt, I didn't think. I moved. I scrambled across the debris-strewn floor, kicking away shards of safety glass that danced like diamonds under the dying flickers of the bus's emergency lights. The man with the scar stumbled, disoriented by the impact, his blade clattering onto the floorboards. I didn't wait to see if he recovered. I dove through the shattered rear windshield, landing hard on the wet pavement outside. The rain was torrential now, a curtain of gray noise that masked my frantic gasps for air. I didn't look back at the wreckage. My eyes were locked on the black sedan idling on the shoulder. The old woman, no, the woman who had played the part of the old woman, was standing perfectly still. Her coat was gone, replaced by a dark, tactical overcoat that looked like it belonged in a classified military catalog. She didn't look frail anymore. She looked like a predator that had finally shed its camouflage. She tilted her head, motioning toward the car. "Get in," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of the raspy age I'd heard earlier. "The internal security teams will be here within 2 minutes. You want to survive this? Or do you want to be the fall guy for an attempt to break the law with a false accusation of conspiracy?" I scrambled into the back seat, my legs shaking so violently I almost tripped. As I slammed the door, the car surged forward, disappearing into the labyrinth of the city's back alleys. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but the adrenaline was beginning to give way to a cold, hard clarity. I reached into my coat lining and pulled out the drive and the key. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound composed. "Who are you people? I was just trying to catch a bus home." The woman, whose name she told me was Elena, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "You were the perfect choice, Leo. You're invisible. You have no record, no ties to the organized groups, and you possess an innate sense of empathy that makes you predictable. We needed someone to hold the drive long enough to lure the group's sweepers out into the open. By engaging them, they revealed their tactical positions to our surveillance network. You didn't buy a bus ticket, you provided the bait for a trap." I stared at the drive in my hand. "I'm a civilian. You could have gotten me killed. The guy in the bus, he wasn't playing around." "And that's why you're still alive," she replied calmly. "You were the only one who could get past their sensors because you weren't carrying any tech they were programmed to detect. They were looking for high-end hardware. They ignored the guy with a generous heart. You helped us dismantle a regional cell of a dangerous network that has been operating under the radar for years. Their illegal weapons, their distribution of prohibited substances, it all ends tonight." She pulled the car into a secluded parking garage. A team of men and women in dark uniforms, the internal security forces she had mentioned, was waiting. They didn't look like police. They looked like shadows given shape. As I stepped out, Elena handed me a manila envelope. "Your student loans, your medical bills, the arrears on your apartment, it's all being cleared," she said. "Consider it a consultant's fee for your bravery. But there's a condition. You forget this happened. You never mention the bus, the woman, or the drive. To the world, you just fell asleep on your ride home and woke up to a mundane, unremarkable life." I took the envelope, the weight of it feeling like a lifeline. I looked back at the city, its neon lights reflecting in the puddles, looking suddenly like a map of a war zone I had somehow walked through and survived. I realized then that the woman wasn't a hero, and the people she worked for weren't exactly guardians of justice. They were just another side of the same coin, a different kind of authority that played by the same ruthless rules. "And if I talk?" I asked, my voice low. Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a cold, professional expression. "Then you'll find that the life you're trying to build will become very difficult to maintain. Stick to your path, Leo. Keep your head down. And next time, don't be so kind to strangers at the bus stop." She drove away, leaving me standing in the silent garage. I looked at the envelope, then at the heavy key I was still clutching. I dropped the key into a storm drain, watching it vanish into the darkness below. I walked out into the rain, feeling the heavy, cold pressure of the night lift. I had my life back, but as I looked at my reflection in a shop window, I knew I wasn't the same person who had stood under that bus stop awning hours ago. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't understand, and in this city, even the survivors are just waiting for the next move. I turned my collar up against the wind and started walking home, finally, mercifully alone.